Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, really anything that gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, which covers all of the above. Joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing, Scott?
Doing fine down here in Tennessee. Unlike most of the rest of the country, it's been relatively cool seasonally. Had a lot of rain, but I know things might be different where you are up in New York, and so it is definitely different from Phoenix, which is it's been
let's be glad we're not in Phoenix right now.
Absolutely, more than 3 weeks of temperatures above 110. They set a record for the low temperature the other morning. The low temperature was a cool 97 degrees. So,
whew, man. Yeah. Well, I'm up here outside Rochester, New York, on a little family visit, and the weather's been fine, but I will say the day that we drove up was toward the tail end of the most recent wave of smoke from Canadian wildfires, and boy, it was smoky.
Yeah.
It's been, my parents live up here, and I've been talking to them about their experience of the climate here this summer. There was like a whole week where basically they weren't supposed to go outside because the air was so bad. So it's been an interesting summer everywhere.
Yeah, we had a couple of days of unsafe air quality here due to the wildfires. But then the rains came in and kind of washed that out. Thank goodness. So.
Right, you went from wildfires to flash flood.
Well, yeah, that's true, but that's also kind of East Tennessee, not necessarily the wildfire smoke thing, but from heat to flash floods, that's summertime.
Well, we have non-meteorological topics to talk about this week. We are going to talk a little bit about an interesting essay that ran in The Atlantic magazine, asking the question, is Tennessee a democracy? Interesting question. We had some developments in new construction around the stadium site in the Old City, we'll mention. A change in county policy on bringing guns into libraries. Good news for all of you who have long desired to bring your gun with you into the library. You can now do it. And we will start by talking about two of our upcoming city races. Scott, you have been sort of methodically working through each of these contested races, and this week you focused on City Council at-large seats A and B, and of course our subscribers can read your very good analyses and summary of both of those races, interviews with the candidates on our website. If you're not a subscriber, this is a good time to become one. But we will go ahead and talk about those as well. So, Scott, let's start out by talking about City Council at Large, Seat A. What's going on there?
Yeah, well, Seat A is, all these, both the ones we're going to talk about today are at-large seats, which means in the primary and in the general election, voters citywide get to vote in them. So and the top two finishers go on to the general election. And Seat A features 3 candidates, so the top 2 vote getters will go on. But it's kind of an interesting dynamic. We've got the incumbent, who is Lynn Fugate. She won in 2019 in what ended up being a pretty close race with Charles Lomax Jr., who's now the head of the Knoxville Area Urban League. She's running against Cameron Brooks, who is a realtor, former head of the Democratic Party in Knox County, union organizer. That sort of he's got a pretty broad background, and then a newcomer named Darren Worsham, who is on the ballot, is doing kind of a minimalist campaign. He's not able to. He has some family health issues. He's not able to get out and campaign as one might expect. So I think he could be considered a long shot to be one of the top 2s. It looks like it's going to be Fugate and Brooks going at each other. Fugate's, of course, running on her record, both on city council and before. She was she's a former banker. She's the head of the regional Girl Scouts organization here in East Tennessee. She kind of headed up the 9 counties one visioning effort from the right around the turn of the century. It's a strange term for someone my age to use, but it is accurate. That kind of laid some of the groundwork for some of the things that have happened since then in Knoxville. She also served on the school board for 2 terms and was elected in 2019. She's been her kind of signature initiative, I think, was the establishing the affordable housing fund in the city. The city has always given some money, put some money up for to help with build affordable housing in the city. What her initiative did, she worked with Justice Knox, which is a social justice advocacy group, and the Kincannon administration to come up with this. It's mandated by ordinance now. Commission passed or council passed this. So it's the law that the city must spend at least $5 million in local funds for affordable housing each year for the next 10 years. They're actually at a pace faster than that. They spent $8 million the first year was in effect, $7.5 million for this year. She's running on. That is probably the biggest initiative that she's pushed through. She's kind of a voice on council for fiscal responsibility, not necessarily cutting spending or whatever, but she is one who always looks at this as at a lot of initiatives is this is a great thing, but can we afford it? How do we fund it? And she is and that goes back to her background as a banker. Brooks is he's not run for office before as far as a public office, but he's been very active in politics ever since he came here. He's from Bristol originally, moved here, go to UT, got involved with United Campus Workers there, and helped organize it, and it grew exponentially while he was doing that. And he stayed with UCW after he graduated. He, as I mentioned earlier, he was the head of the Democratic Party for a time in Knox County. Has also served on the state Democratic committee, and he served on the Knox County Election Commission. So he's been very involved behind the scenes. He's getting out in front and running for office now. Obviously, he's kind of tapping into the network that he has put together from his union work and his work with the Democratic Party, and then there's Mr. Worsham. He works for a gas company. He's a regional manager, and he was going. He said he was hard to get a hold of, to tell you the truth, and to talk to him because he is basically not running at least a vigorous campaign. He's doing. He wasn't going to do anything at all because he's a family. His father is battling cancer, and he needs to be. He said he needs to spend as much time with his family as possible, which is certainly understandable. And so he talked to me. He's been on WBR's public affairs Sunday program, and said Inside Tennessee, I believe. In the but he's not really going to be campaigning hard, and so it's basically going to be come down to he. One thing he did say, this is kind of interesting, and it is true. It's a 3-person race, as we said. He said he's kind of the none of the above candidate. So if neither Fugate nor Brooks floats your boat, and you want to file a protest vote, you can vote for him. He's kind of laughed about it. He's a very good natured guy. He's very folksy and and straightforward, straight shooting, East Tennessean, and but again, he's not really going to be campaigning. It'll be more Fugate, who, like I said, is kind of does a lot of focuses a lot on making sure the city can afford to do what it is it wants to do, the services it provides to public. And then Brooks, whose focus is a lot more on being a champion of of working families. It's and again, that goes kind of back to his union days. I think he really is tries to look at things from a family, a blue collar family perspective when he looks at policy.
Well, and also worth mentioning that Brooks would be the first openly gay council member if he were elected.
Yeah, that is very interesting. So he says himself, he thinks that's a big deal because it would bring, a representation from a group for a group that has been marginalized. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting race, leaving kind of Worsham aside, because, as you say, the most likely result out of the primary is that Fugate and Brooks, who both have raised money and are running active campaigns, you would think they're the most likely two to go on. But if you just look at those two, I feel like Fugate kind of represents a sort of, to the extent there is a Knoxville establishment these days that's been in flux, I would say, for the last 10 or 20 years. But there sort of still is this kind of establishment of business leaders, people who have experience in and around, the Knoxville Chamber and Leadership Knoxville and things like that. And Lynn Fugate very much comes out of that world, and Brooks a little bit more from, the activist and or labor friendly world. And I think my sense is that Brooks, seeing the overall kind of basically liberal lean of the city electorate, is trying to position himself a little bit more as like the progressive candidate against the more establishment candidate. Fugate has an endorsement from Mayor India Kincannon. Of course, they served on the school board together, and Fugate's been pretty supportive of Kincannon's policies, right?
Yeah, that's a good point to make. The mayor has not endorsed in other races, so that's she did endorse all the incumbents last time there was election in 2021. But this time, Fugate so far is the only one she's endorsed in the. That, and I think that's a reflection of Fugate's by and large support of the mayor's initiatives. I mean, they work very closely together on the Affordable Housing Fund, for example. As far as endorsements go, on kind of the flip side, it's kind of interesting. Brooks is a realtor, and the East Tennessee Realtors did not, they endorsed Fugate and not him. So it's kind of a.
But he does have support from, for example, State Rep Gloria Johnson.
Absolutely,
supporting Brooks, right?
Yeah. Gloria Johnson is supporting Brooks. Sam McKenzie, the other Democrat who represents city of Knoxville in the legislature, is supporting Brooks. Harold Middlebrook, the civil rights icon, is his campaign treasurer. He's got a lot of support from a lot of heavy hitters. So that's reflected as well in his campaign financing. He and Fugate are the closest of any two candidates running in one of these elections as far as their fundraising go, and it's going to be one of the more competitive races I think in the as far as who gets the majority of votes heading into the general election. So,
all right. Well, let's switch and look at seat B, which, unlike the other two at-large council races, which each have three candidates in the primary, seat B only has two, which means that both of them are going to go on into the general election. And so the primary is sort of like it's like the scrimmage before the game.
Yeah, it's kind of like a preseason game in the NFL where.
Right. You can kind of see the relative strengths, but this has Debbie Helsley, who ran for county mayor last year as a Democrat, and builder R. Bentley Marlowe. So what can you tell us about the two of them?
Well, Helsley is very similar to Brooks. She grew up in a union household, was a union president. The Communication Workers America, she was the president of the local here. She has been very active in politics behind the scenes as well. As you said, she ran for county mayor. Did probably a little better than a lot of people would have predicted. She lost to the incumbent county mayor Glenn Jacobs by about 10 points, and she's as you and I have talked about before, countywide, the electorate is more Republican, and so Jacobs had some advantages there. But Helsley won got the most votes inside the city limits of Knoxville, and so she and the Knoxville city electorate is more left of center than Knox County as a whole. So she's kind of well positioned there, running. She is one thing that has to be said is that Janet Testerman, who holds that seat now, and she's decided not to run for re-election. Helsley thought she was going to be unopposed up until the day of the deadline for submitting your petition to run for office, when Marlowe filed his petition, and that was May 18th, and he filed his petition. So he's running against her. Marlowe is a builder. As you said, he basically focuses on the Mechanicsville neighborhood, the historic neighborhood just north of downtown, in the shadow of the hill of Knoxville College. Mechanicsville is has lots of old historic houses that were or it's a historic district. There's a lot of old houses. A lot of them had been in disrepair, and he saw an opportunity about 20 years ago and started renovating. He renovated the house he lived in, then he bought another one and renovated it. He could buy them for pennies almost. He said he would spend $1,000 buying a dilapidated house and fix it up. And so he's made a career of investing in the Mechanicsville neighborhood. He says he's invested something like $8 million in the neighborhood, and he is focused almost single-mindedly on housing, as one might expect. Residential housing is a big part of what he is focused on, and housing is a major issue. It's when you talk to the council candidates, it's the number one issue that just about all of them bring up. And Helsley also talks about housing as being a major issue. So, and her perspective is more from the affordability for families. And in fact, that's one of the things she'll say. She's talking about housing affordability rather than affordable housing, because it's it crosses all economic levels. The difficulty people are having in buying and renting places to live now in Knoxville. So that's going to be a big part of their campaign.
And Marlowe ran into some controversy because of some social media posts that he had put up a few years ago, I guess, speaking in very harsh terms about Knoxville's homeless population, including seeming to advocate for killing them.
Yeah, his posts were quite harsh. He talked about he used the term euthanize them. He can he basically said if one of his posts was if you had he basically compared them to animals that needed to be put down. Mm-hmm. And he just really some pretty extraordinary things that he said, and those started circulating. He issued an apology, but also a kind of a justification for his a rationalization for his attitude, because he says that he has said that he's lost thousands and thousands of dollars worth of equipment and tools from people who are unhoused, who've stolen from his job sites. Mechanicsville is an area that's easily accessible by a large number of people who are unhoused, who are in the downtown, north of downtown area. He also has said he's been assaulted. He is, but he also said that he put together a charity. He hires people who are homeless. So he does. One of the things I asked him for this profile was, we'd already reported on the controversy and what he had done and said. I said, do you have any actual policies of what to do about homelessness? And he, part of him was basically more of what's done, but he wants it done more effectively, which is, the city working with nonprofit agencies and service providers and trying to create more housing. One of the things, of course, that he wants to do is create more housing so that people don't go into homelessness. that affordability issue. But he also wants accountability for people who are unhoused who commit crimes. He thinks that basically the city's too soft on people who are homeless and commit crimes. So it's been Helsley has been very measured in her response to that. She doesn't. She hasn't come out and directly said, Marlo is this or that, but she has said that, she's going to take the approach of a more humane approach toward people who are unhoused and policies to address that. She is a major proponent of housing first and permanent supportive housing, which is kind of the preferred method of with the city to address people who are chronically homeless. Although it is also very expensive, and coming up with that funding is one of the key things that she wants to do.
And Helsley has support from a lot of sort of, I guess you would say, the mainstream progressive contingent in Knoxville, former Mayor Madeline Rogero, a lot of people affiliated with the Democratic Party. Obviously, Helsley's been very active in the party, right?
Right, and she's been very active as a Democrat. A lot of her support overlaps with Brooks's support in Seat A. But she also has other support. Marlo, he only began raising funds on May 18 when he filed his paperwork to run, and in just 6 weeks he raised a pretty decent amount of money. A lot of it from developers, people that he knows that he's seen, and he's as I said, he's focused a lot on housing. He's been very visible at city council meetings for the last couple of years, for example, and of course, obviously at Planning Commission, and he's been very vocal about what's called the missing middle housing, which is anything in between a single family house and a large apartment complex that the city's looking at expanding or changing its zoning ordinances to allow more of that. Marlo thinks that the pace of that's gone too slow, and he actually, at his own expense, has filed amendments to the city's zoning code through the Planning Commission to address that. We talked about that on the podcast as well and reported it in our newsletter. And so that is something he's done. But Helsley, as we talked about, she is very well connected and very. She also one of the things that she has done is she was the founding president of her neighborhood association. So she's worked with neighborhood associations all across the city in trying to do things that are in the best interest of residential neighborhoods, and she and that goes a long way. It's kind of one of the traditional means of getting into city council and leadership positions is through a lot of neighborhood work. Lauren Ryder in the 4th District is one who had followed that path, and it's a very effective one because especially when you get to that level, you end up having a network all across the city of people who are active in their neighborhoods, regardless of their party or anything else, and that's a pretty strong network.
Right, and as we said, that Seat B race is one where we're functionally going to run the same election twice in a row. So we'll see how Marlo and Helsley do in August, and then we'll see how they do again in November.
Yeah, and lest anybody believe that a victory in the primary in a 2-person race automatically translates to a victory in the general election. want to point out that 4 years ago, Fugate, as mentioned, ran against Charles Lomax Jr. and she won pretty handily she was first pretty handily in the primary, and then in the general election, same electorate, of course, a little bit better turnout, even though all turnout in city elections tends to be dismal these days. But Lomax closed the gap to within 79 votes, and so
right.
It is not a guarantee. The result in the primary is no guarantee that the result in the general election will be exactly the same.
Right. You would rather win the primary than not, but it doesn't mean you can just kick back for the general election.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it doesn't mean campaign from the couch.
Right. All right. Well, let's turn our attentions to normally not a very exciting or controversial part of our civic infrastructure, which is our county libraries. This past week, County Mayor Glenn Jacobs basically issued an announcement that he was unilaterally lifting the prohibition on firearms in libraries. And basically, he said that as far as we know, one person, one Knox County resident, one patron of the Knox County Libraries had raised a concern with Jacobs about the prohibition on firearms, which has been a long-standing thing at our county libraries. It's posted on the doors of the libraries. You can't bring firearms and weapons into the libraries. But one constituent apparently raised concerns about this with Jacobs, and he said, okay, we will lift that prohibition. And it was kind of interesting in the initial notification of this that went out to Knox County commissioners. Andrew Davis, who is Jacobs' policy advisor, sent an email to commissioners and said that the mayor had determined that state law required him to allow people with concealed carry permits to bring their guns into libraries. But the interesting thing is, if you go and read the statute that Andrew Davis cited, it lists several. Now, it does say that in general, local governments can't restrict guns in various places, but then it lists a whole bunch of exceptions to that, places that local governments absolutely are empowered to restrict firearms. And one of those very explicitly stated is libraries. So it is abundantly clear that state law makes it legal to restrict guns in libraries. And in fact, many library systems across the state also restrict guns in libraries. I didn't look at all of them, but all of the other major cities, Memphis, Nashville, Chattanooga, they all don't allow guns in libraries. Blount County Library doesn't allow people to bring guns in. So this is not something that's required by state law. This was a policy choice by Jacobs to do this. And Davis followed up with a second email to commissioners, basically clarifying that, saying, it's not that state law requires us to allow this. It's that it makes it optional, essentially, and we are going to choose to allow it. I asked whether they had done any outreach to either library staff or patrons beyond the one guy who complained to get their thoughts on it. And the answer was that they did ask staff about it, and the response was mixed. Some were in favor, some were not. But that no, they did not do any other public outreach to ask people who actually use the libraries on a regular basis, people who bring their children to story times at libraries and so forth. They did not ask whether anybody else thought it was a good idea to start allowing guns into the library. Jacobs said that he was basically persuaded that your right to self-defense should not end at the door to the library. And I guess it says something about the relative worldview of people on various sides of this issue, that some people perceive a library as a place that you might want to bring a gun to. So
real quick, I'm sorry, Jesse, I got
go ahead.
a clarification question on this, because you said it in your citing of Mr. Davis, is that it's Tennessee residents who have a carry permit. And now
Correct.
Last was it 2022 session that we have the permitless carry in the state of Tennessee. And so
yes.
But but you could still get a permit in the state of Tennessee. You could still get a concealed carry permit, even though you don't have to have it for most regular carry.
Right.
So this is specifically that's a different field of people, to make sure I'm understanding correctly. It can't be just go ahead.
What the mayor has said, the new policy is that people who hold a permit, and you are correct that you no longer need a permit in the state of Tennessee to concealed carry. If you are otherwise legally entitled to buy and own a gun, you can carry it in places that weapons are permitted without a permit. But for the purposes of this county policy, right now they are saying that it is for people who are permit holders, which I guess would reflect, some, because you do have to go through a certain amount of. I think you can just do it online now, but
I did mine online, even though I knew the permitless carry was coming out, because for me, at least, if I want to leave the state with it, there's the reciprocity states. There's a whole list of states that will respect my carry permit if I take my gun into their state. And so that's the main reason I got mine. If I'm going out of state, like we have a Wyoming trip that we've been talking about for years and all this different stuff, and I don't know if I'm gonna or not, but I might want to. And so I wanted to get my permit so that I had not just Tennessee right to carry, but I could carry elsewhere as well.
Right. And there's probably also a bunch of people who just, who got permits in the years when you still had to get a permit in order to conceal carry, and, who still have active permits from that. And that may have been a kind of a gesture at compromise by the mayor as well, that like, we're not just going to leave it wide open. Now, of course, you can ask whether anybody's going to actually check. Probably not. If somebody, you're not even going to know that people are walking into a library, if it is in fact concealed. And even if a library staff member notices that somebody is carrying, because we have this policy, it's probably not very likely that anybody's going to go up and ask to see anyone's permit. In reality, probably anybody who is already carrying anywhere else is just going to see it as licensed to carry inside the library as well. But the policy is that it is for permit holders. Yeah.
Yeah, and the the one person who complained will obviously carry, but other than that, I don't think that it's a common practice for or a universally held desire to go armed to a library. It just doesn't. Quite frankly, I've never felt threatened in a library when I've gone in, and I don't think that most, especially the branch libraries, it's predominantly families, kids going to story time, that sort of thing. It's not doesn't seem to be a place where danger is lurking around every corner in the every aisle of the stacks. I just don't see that. But I know that for Jacobs, it's a kind of a philosophical place to stand in that.
Sure, absolutely. And again, if we assume, as most of us do, that Jacobs is at least considering running for another office, like say governor, and that he would be contending in a Republican primary with a Republican primary electorate that tends to be very staunch in its advocacy for Second Amendment rights. This is the kind of thing that you can. It's one more little way he can signal his support for Second Amendment rights. My favorite response to this that I saw was on Twitter, because he posted his statement about this on Twitter, and of course people responded in various ways. But one person asked, "Well, since it's a library, are you going to be required to have silencers?" I thought was a good question.
It's a good question, and
if
it's
you are going to engage in gunplay in the library, at least you should be respectful of other people and not disturb them.
And it's one thing it's good that somebody's got a sense of humor about some of this, although it's it can be a very serious issue. But a silencer would be appropriate, I think.
Right. So anyway, there was no big pushback or response or anything that we've seen in the last day since this was announced. I guess we'll see if anybody at County Commission or anywhere else raises any concerns or objections or anything to it. But that is the policy. It is in effect now. So if you've been meaning to return those overdue books, but have been flustered by having to leave, the prospect of having to leave your firearm in your vehicle while you ran into the library, you no longer have that excuse. So get those overdue books and DVDs back, and you can go armed while you're doing it. Little bit of news over by the stadium this week, and this was not unexpected, of course. We have always talked about the adjacent private development that is supposed to accompany this stadium. Randy Boyd, the owner of Tennessee Smokies and of Boyd Sports, has essentially promised that there would be at least $100 million of private construction right around the stadium. But Scott, there was actual progress on that this week, right?
Yes. Construction has already begun on apartment development that's going to be known as Yardley Flats. It is going to, it's a $70 million project. So that's 7/10 of the $100 million. Actually, it'll end up being more like $140 million, because the second phase of this is going to be a roughly equal amount of investment. But this is one half of that. It's a 233 unit apartment complex, 2 buildings, one building along the kind of the left field line of where the baseball field is going to be laid out. And then another smaller building in the beyond the left field corner. So they call them, building 1 and building 2. So they will overlook the stadium. The top floors will overlook the stadium. Has some nice views of the ball games. You can, very similar, and it was intentionally done this way, very similar to Wrigleyville in Chicago, where the Cubs play. Which, the Cubs are the parent club of the Tennessee Smokies. So, anyway, this, it wasn't technically a groundbreaking. As I said, they've already started working, excavating and doing some work there by the stadium. But the development company that's doing it is called Third Base Residential. It is a partnership with Joe Fielden Jr. and Sr., long-time developers here, and the Gym Community Development Group, which is Randy Boyd and Steve Davis. Steve Davis, former UT football player and a very successful businessman in Chicago. They formed Gym Development to do these private developments adjacent to the stadium, and that partnership with Fielden's actually going to be doing the construction work on this. They are it's going to be obviously built simultaneously with the stadium. The building along the third base line, the larger of the 2 buildings, is scheduled to open around the same time as the stadium, right in time for opening day of the 2025 baseball season. The other building, the one in the kind of left corner, will probably take a little bit longer. It should open in the summer of that year. But this is this is one of those things that officials have pointed to, is this investment that is going to come with the stadium. And it's not a kind of a hopefully somebody will build something in the future somewhere else thing. It's coming with the stadium, and that construction has already begun. And one of the interesting things is, again, this is an area where that was changed irrevocably by urban renewal in the late 50s and early 60s. There's an area called the Bottom, which is the area along First Creek, east of the old city, and the residential, basically the residences there along the creek and around it were removed, and people had to, African Americans had to remove elsewhere for that. This site was actually more of already an industrial site at the time. It was the Lay's Packing Company is the main own most of the property that's now going to be the stadium. But one of the things that Boyd has said is he wants to honor the people who lived in the bottoms and were affected by urban renewal and the history of black baseball in Knoxville. And Yardley Flats kind of reflects that. It's going to be named after William Francis Yardley, who was a Knoxville's first black lawyer. He actually ran for governor of Tennessee. He was a city alderman. He was on the county court. Very influential and man of the area, the era. Before, during, and after the Civil War. Very interesting character. He actually he was born before the Civil War. He was actually born a free citizen. His mother was white and he was left at the to be raised by a white family in Knoxville. So he did not experience slavery directly, but obviously as an African American, he was affected by it nonetheless. But during Reconstruction, he had quite the political career. Was a very dapper guy. Wore a frock coat and derby around town, and was everybody called him Squire Yardley. So and then after he ran for governor, called him Governor Yardley. So. Anyway, that's the kind of the backstory on the name of the development. Again, it's the $70 million project that's going in, more residents for that area. Obviously the hope is that there will be other developments around there, and one of the things is Randy Boyd already owns property across Florida Avenue from there. Then there's David Dewhurst and Mark Hines have bought property nearby as well, kind of beyond that left field corner at the little bend in First Creek there. They've bought a lot of property there. They haven't announced plans for what they're going to do, but obviously there's something that they're planning. So it is tangible evidence that there is going to be development around the stadium.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's interesting on the naming. There's always sort of this double-edged sword with these things, because you have Yardley Flats, and then the other building, the other residential building there, is going to be named after Buford Delaney, who was African American painter from Knoxville. And these are, of course, going to be market rate apartments. They're not going to be quote unquote affordable or subsidized housing or anything. And given the demographics of the rest of downtown, people who have moved into new units, one can suppose that probably the racial minority population of those apartments may not be very high. And so there's a cynical take on this that would see this as one more instance of sort of like wiping out an area and then building things and naming them after the people who you removed from it, like Sequoia Hills and Cherokee Boulevard and so forth. We do have a long history of that, of course. On the other hand, they are paying tribute to famous Black Knoxvillians of note who maybe many people haven't heard of. And so, that would certainly be the argument for it. But it's the kind of thing there can be multiple perspectives on.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. One could argue that Buford Delaney, a lot of people know, because he's quite acclaimed artist. But Yardley, I mean, very few Knoxvillians, I think, remember who he was, and it is a way to remember who he was. But like you said, this is, and it's a delicate thing. I mean, if they had, come in and built the stadium and adjacent apartments and didn't, called them something else, called them, Johnny Majors and Phil Fulmer,
right.
Apartments then, or whatever, I'm just made that up on spot. So there's probably a lot more appropriate people we could name. Todd Helton, for example, is a Tennessee,
right.
Tennessee guy who played, Knoxville guy who played professional baseball at a very high level, who ought to be in the Hall of Fame, by the way. Little editorial comment. Anyway, there would be a lot of criticism that way too. So, I think that for whatever you think of it, that is the backstory behind the name of these new apartments that are going in by the stadium.
Right. All right. Well, I wanted to talk just a little bit about this essay by Anne Applebaum in The Atlantic that was published this past week with the headline, as I said earlier, "Is Tennessee a Democracy?" And on one hand, this covers a lot of familiar ground. It's mostly talking about things that we've already talked about on the podcast, and that certainly many people have written many things about in the last 5 or 6 months, having to do with, the Tennessee Three, the expulsion of Representatives Justin Jones and Justin Pearson from the state legislature, the protests, mass protests for gun safety regulations, and the gerrymandering that we saw the last time around, specifically the carving up of Nashville into 3 different congressional districts that functionally flipped a seat from Democrats to Republicans in the state. All these things that we've talked about. But what's interesting, I think, about Applebaum's perspective is that she, if people know who she is, she's a very well-known political writer and reporter who really specializes in international affairs and foreign policy, with a particular focus in recent years on the growth of authoritarianism in countries that she sort of sees as endangered democracies, and particularly Poland and Hungary, where she has lived and spent a lot of time in both of those countries, and has kind of chronicled the ways that these countries that emerged as democracies after the fall of the Soviet Union have kind of started to slide back into authoritarian one-party rule, with the erosion of civil liberties, the erosion of freedom of speech, and so forth. And she brought that perspective to Tennessee. She got intrigued, I think, by all of the attention that the Tennessee Three got and the discussion around that. And she kind of wanted to see, well, what does one-party rule look like in the United States, in a place where one political party has so much power, as the Republican Party does at the state level in Tennessee now, with the supermajority in the legislature, control of both Senate seats, control of governor's office. By the time Bill Lee's second term ends, that will be 16 straight years of Republicans in the governor's seat. And it's an interesting article. I guess the good news for those of us who live in Tennessee is that her first impression was that, well, okay, this doesn't really look like Hungary. She found very active, thriving, sort of voices of opposition to the one-party rule in Nashville, and that freedom of speech is still much healthier in the United States than it is in Poland or Hungary. That's good. Glad to hear that. But she saw a lot of similar tendencies too. I thought one of the most interesting things in the piece was she looked at the way that the state has sort of been kind of at war with its big cities, and particularly with Nashville, because the cities are these bases of, sort of liberal cosmopolitanism, I guess you could say. And she said that very similarly in Hungary, Viktor Orban, the quasi-authoritarian head of state there, has also been at sort of political war with Budapest, the biggest cities in Hungary, which again is a sort of internationalist, more liberal, cosmopolitan center of diverse thought and politics and so forth. And the real question that she ends up asking in this piece is, what is the goal of democratic governance? Is it to represent all the voices of the people in a given place, in this case, the state of Tennessee? Or is it a sort of winner-take-all sort of governance where if you can engineer your way to a majority through gerrymandering, through various kinds of voter suppression or and so forth, that you can then just do whatever you want and basically ignore and treat as politically illegitimate any kind of voices of opposition. And she kind of ends the article on a note of saying that she talks about the recording that came out after the Tennessee 3 incident and all the attention it got. People probably remember that the Tennessee Holler published a recording from an internal Republican caucus meeting where a lot of Republican legislators were kind of doing a postmortem on the Tennessee 3 issue, but not from the standpoint that perhaps they had overplayed their hands or maybe done anything at all wrong in that whole situation, but that the real problem, as they saw it, was that Democrats and liberals were out to destroy Western civilization, destroy the values that Tennessee stands for, that these are our enemies. And the point that Applebaum made is this is the kind of rhetoric that you might expect from a beleaguered minority group that feels like it is in fact about to be wiped out politically. But that in fact, these are the statements of people in a supermajority position who are well positioned to continue winning state elections for the foreseeable future, and yet seem kind of hell-bent on just shutting down and delegitimizing any other voices, any kind of voices of opposition. That is where she saw the danger of, the authoritarian mindset is not just that you need to win, but that you need to kind of eradicate any other voices, that it becomes intolerable to a majority to have to even listen to or grant political legitimacy to any kind of voices of opposition.
Yeah, it is an interesting dynamic about having, basically there is a one-party government in Tennessee when it comes to the statewide politics. It's obviously not mandated, the Democratic Party is not, has not been outlawed. There's
right.
speeches still,
they're not rounding up and locking up political opponents.
No. But I think that what the phenomenon kind of is that it doesn't, when a party isn't challenged, it can do whatever it wants to do, regardless. And this is just one of those, facets of our political system, is that no matter how large the minority party is, it is. If a party has a majority, especially a supermajority, as in Tennessee, they call all the shots. It's not. There's no. The Tennessee legislature, in the Tennessee legislature, the Republican supermajority doesn't even have. They don't have to compromise.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I mean, there is no. It is basically their way or the highway, and the question. It's legitimate to ask if that's healthy for democracy in Tennessee. But the thing is, this is something that because the Democratic Party hasn't been outlawed and because nobody's rounding up Democrats, there is an avenue for Democrats to improve their lot. Especially as is in many instances, the direction of the Republican Party in Tennessee kind of runs counter to a lot of public opinion.
Right. As we've talked about with the gun safety push in particular, there's a lot of polls showing broad public support, including among Republicans, for some degree of gun safety regulation for things like red flag laws and so forth. And also that the state, according to polls, the state population as a whole is much less extreme on the issue of abortion, say, than the absolute ban that we have, that there would probably be majority support for a somewhat less restrictive abortion policy. And, the question then becomes, how long can a majority a political majority sustain itself by pursuing policies that are actually unpopular with a majority of the people it ostensibly represents? And, that, I guess, that's an open question.
Yeah.
We may find out.
Yeah, well, I think it seems to me that the question is, are you more likely to get reelected by doing popular things or by defaming your opponent and having less of an actual opponent? And I think it's a national thing. I don't think it's a Tennessee thing specifically, but I think it's become more advantageous just for the sheer politics of it to destroy the enemy, so you have a weak enemy to beat in an election, than it is to perform the duties that we may think you should be doing as that position holder. And like I said, I think that's the broad decay of U.S. politics at large.
Yeah, it's
of course,
it's not a
gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is a big part of that too, as we've talked about in Tennessee. That the supermajority itself is mostly a creation of. I mean, if you go by the level of support that a Democratic candidate for president will get between 35 and 40% of the vote statewide in Tennessee, and yet Democrats only have 25% of the House of Representatives. And so the fact that we even have a supermajority is to some degree just a manipulation of voting boundaries.
Yeah, but getting to what Seth mentioned was, this isn't. It's unique to Tennessee because Tennessee is so the supermajority is so strong in Tennessee, but this is really it's not just a Tennessee phenomenon, or it's a human nature phenomenon of power,
right?
Of power politics, and it would be. It's not a Republican thing, really, although it is in Tennessee because they happen to be the party that has a supermajority.
Right, because the gerrymandering, where's the name gerrymandering come from? Isn't that where you are now, Jesse? Isn't that a New York guy?
I think it was New Jersey, but yes, it was up or Massachusetts. I can't honestly remember. We'll look that up at the break. But yes, it was a Northeastern phenomenon. And certainly, to be clear, gerrymandering is something that political majorities of both parties have done, across the country. The name goes back to the early 1800s, so it is something baked into our political system. But it is also something that has always worked against actual, real representative government. Really.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Agreed.
And that's kind of one of the things that makes this fascinating to watch. I mean, I think that there are Republicans who are some Republicans who are concerned about that kind of disconnect between what the political leaders say and what the public wants, and it's not to say that the public is always right. There was a time in Tennessee where the majority of the public wanted to enslave a third of the population. So that's it's not necessarily it is something that is this kind of one party rule is something that it doesn't necessarily mean that democracy is ruined or broken, but it does bear vigilance in making sure that the democratic democratic principles are maintained.
Well, the essay is worth reading, and you can find it on the Atlantic website. Seth, why don't we go ahead and take a quick break here?
Our guest this week is Knoxville City Council member Seema Singh. And welcome, Seema, to Compass Points. I'm glad you could join us.
Good to be here. Always good to talk to you guys.
All right. Thanks so much. And the reason that you are taking your time out of your busy day to join us is you have a proposal coming up at next Tuesday's City Council meeting addressing what's known as missing middle housing. Talk to us a little bit about what you're proposing and why you're proposing it.
My resolution is it's a tiny sliver of missing middle housing. It's more a statement of my intention. When we did Recode a few years back, we called it a living document. And, those were ordinances that council put together. We haven't done that as a council, and I don't want to be the one that says we need to redo Recode, but we kind of do right now with the housing crisis that's going on. We need to look what our part of it is. And I think some of our part is in the zoning rules, the regulations, the standards. So it's more my intention to say, here, let's look at this one tiny sliver that's causing developers to have to pay more and take more time to build the housing that we so desperately needed last year. So that's what it's about. It's not going to make much of a difference in the housing stock by any means, and I understand that.
Well, what exactly is it? What are you proposing that is to be done?
So in RN2 code, in order, if you want to build duplexes, once you've gotten approved for the zoning, that's one thing. Then you have to ask for, apply for a special use permit in order for it to be a duplex. I think there are 13 of them. Let's take that number out. There were several of them done, and none of them have ever been denied special use, the permission. So it seems like that's a step that we could remove, and then development could occur a little bit faster. This is not going to create a lot of people. When I've talked to them about it, they get concerned about, well, what is it going to look like? What do we expect? It's not changing any of that. There's still all of the design standards, all of the regulations, the setbacks, all of that are still in place. It's just saying, let's just remove that one sliver that ends up taking 3 to 6 months longer.
And basically, so what you're saying is that in an RN2 zone, you would be able to go ahead and build a duplex as long as it has the property has that zoning, and you can meet setbacks and all of those other things. But it would be what we call a use by right, right? A duplex would be a use by right in the RN2 zone.
Correct. So as I was saying, it's not symbolic, but it's a statement of my intention, and I hope council's intention, that we're putting everything into addressing this issue. 80% of zoning in the city is single family housing, which I love my single family house. I'm not trying to get rid of that or touch any of that at all. I do think that mixed housing is useful for us. So this isn't changing anything in RN1. What I'm trying to encourage is to have, I know along the corridors is where we want to talk about density, but a duplex or a fourplex, that's not the type of density that needs to be pushed all the way out to an edge. That's something that can become a part of our neighborhoods. So keeping into consideration all the regulations that are there, for RN2 and duplexes. It's not changing that. It's just sort of, let's help this happen faster, easier, and have our intention to promote it.
Well, and to your point, this is right now, duplexes are allowed in RN2 zones,
right?
And with a special use designation. But if they're always approved, then it's really not special use; it's just regular use. And as Jesse said, it is a kind of a de facto right of property owners to do it. Because
right.
they're always, but the difference is whoever wants to build the duplex has to go through the time and the expense, because it costs money to get approved, to submit plans, to get approval from the planning commission for the special use, and then of course city council as well. So it's really it does reduce the amount of time, and it is something that comes up quite often. It came up at the last city council meeting the last planning commission meeting that I covered, and it's going to be coming up in August at the next planning commission meeting. I mean, it does happen on a fairly regular basis, especially now with the emphasis on duplexes and other components of this missing middle housing that's kind of bubbled up as a possible solution for the housing crisis. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was there any particular thing that prompted this for you, as a particular incidence of someone wanting to build a duplex but running into delays, and delays cost money in the construction business. So,
right.
So
no, this is not a certain development or developer that brought this up. It's basically, there's just this piece of bureaucracy. There's so much bureaucracy in places where I know that we need rules and regulations, but there's some places where it's not necessary and has actually hindered us. So it's more, people want to see things as a battle between developers and neighborhoods, and it's not like that. At this point in Knoxville, we need development. It is the developers that do that within neighborhoods. So it's kind of also a reconciliatory thing, like let's all work together in addressing the housing crisis. It's not even a situation, it's a crisis.
Well, and as you say, there is this traditional framing of kind of like neighborhoods against developers. Typically, neighborhood groups have resisted efforts to increase density in existing neighborhoods. I live in Oakwood Lincoln Park, which is a neighborhood that's a mixture of RN1 and RN2, but is more RN2. And so that would be an area where this would have an impact. Do you have any sense? Have you talked to any neighborhood groups? Like, is there more openness, given all the talk about the need for more housing, among neighborhood groups to this kind of shift, or are you anticipating some pushback even to, what you yourself say is a relatively small step?
I'm anticipating some pushback, and that's why I'm starting with a very, very small, tiny sliver of this so that we can start the conversation. We have created this issue in Knoxville. I know the housing crisis is throughout the country, but every time there's a neighborhood that density is being proposed, there's the feeling that the sky is falling, that dangerous people will be moving in, that this, we have problems with school overcrowding. We have problems with there not enough sidewalks and infrastructure. We need to work on all of those things, but they can't wait until after. We can't do all of that and then deal with the housing because we have people that don't have a place to go. So yeah, I think I'm going to be opening. I hope not. I hope that people understand that. Let's take my neighborhood. I'm near West Hills. It's a single family neighborhood. People in my neighborhood may feel that if we allow fourplexes, duplexes, small, 6 apartments, that's going to ruin the character of the neighborhood. I don't think that that's true. I'm not sure what, to me, the character of the neighborhood are the people who live there. I know if I live next to a duplex, and as my parents get older and maybe sell their house, it would be nice for them to be able to move into a duplex, a smaller place near me. So I think it serves the community and the character much more so. But I know that there are a few people that disagree with me.
Well,
yeah, so it'll be interesting to hear the battle. It scares me that what we've turned Knoxville into is a place of people who have and people who will never have. And we've got to, one of the things I've loved about Knoxville, and it's made me move back here so many times when I've left, is that it's affordable. And that's not true. It's not true any longer. That breaks my heart.
Yeah, the one thing that this is doing too is, of course, the administration, the Mayor Kincannon's administration, is looking at addressing missing middle in a more comprehensive way. So this is almost kind of like a test case, I guess. It's you're testing the waters for them a little bit on the pushback they might get, because whatever they propose is probably going to be a lot more
cautious,
a lot more would call for a lot more changes than what yours is doing. Yours is, as you put it, a very small sliver of this, and is has very limited application, and
right.
And really just basically just makes it easier for developers to do what they're already doing.
So what I'm doing is not the same thing. It's along the lines. It augments what the administration is working on. The administration is working on changes in small geographical areas. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about changing this rule for the entire city. Mm-hmm. Doing it in small areas, I don't think goes far enough. We need to look a little bit bigger. It ends up being in the neighborhoods where people don't have the resources to organize against it. And that's been part of our problem. So if we start with saying we're only going to go to the neighborhoods that we think it'll be okay in, we're doing the work for gentrification and fighting density. And so I'm doing it a little bit differently than they are. And I hope they continue. And I hope myself and my council members keep making requests. I'm not changing the ordinances. I'm just asking the Planning Commission to look at it. That's it.
All right. And this will be up at Tuesday's City Council meeting. And so we will certainly have coverage of that. And I think that's a pretty good place to end the conversation, unless you have anything else you want to hit on, Scott.
No, I could put Seema on the spot about a couple other things, but
later.
I do that too often already. I'll cut her some slack today, and we'll end it with this. Seema, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing how this plays out on Tuesday at City Council.
Okay. And you can put me on the spot anytime. It builds character. I'll see you on Tuesday. Bye.
Thanks. Okay, now we are to the Q&A portion of the podcast. Every week we go onto our subscriber-only Facebook group, the Compass Colloquy, which you can join if you're a subscriber, which you can become by going to CompassKnox.com. And we just ask folks if there's anything in particular they would like to hear a little bit more about. And this week, we had an interesting request from, it was Lord Seth Barber, our producer.
Well, I couldn't help myself, because Scott and I worked in here last week and we were doing the show, and I love the process. I love Chris has been probably one of my most recent guests on my show, talking about all the different processes and the election commission and all that kind of stuff. And, the financial closers came out, and Scott had talked a bunch about them last week, and mentioned that a couple people hadn't turned their stuff in on time. And I didn't interrupt last show with this question, but it's like, because I think, Scott, what was the joke? You said something about they don't send their financial crimes unit to your house to knock your door in and come collect the money or the paperwork or whatever. But it did bring up the question. It's like, well, what happens long term if, because you said one of the candidates has still not filed their most recent second quarter return or statements or whatever. And, is there a point when the commission will come in and you are disqualified as a candidate or whatever? What is the actual stick to this process, I suppose, is the full question.
Right, well, and so Scott talked to election administrator Chris Davis, who you just mentioned there, Seth. And Scott, what did Chris say?
Okay, well, so far, all of the candidates for city council have filed their second quarter financial reports. Was the most recent one they've had to file, except for one. That's mayoral candidate R.C. Lawhorn. He still hasn't filed his as of Friday morning when we recorded this. So I talked to Davis, as you said, and this happens quite frequently that people miss deadlines, and for any number of reasons. And the election officials kind of give candidates a little bit of grace. A lot, especially on the local level, where you've got people who are. They've got jobs. They're not professional politicians. They're supposed to be citizen servants. And so they give them a little bit of leeway here. But Lawhorn is the only candidate, and it's been, as of Friday, 11 days since the deadline hit. The deadline was the 10th of June, 10th of July. So for the reporting period that ended June 30th. So also there's another deadline, and this is for candidates who aren't running in the city election. This is for other candidates who still they're either running in the future or they ran in the past. They have open accounts, political accounts. About a dozen. They have to file mid-year reports in off election years. So there were a bunch of candidates a bunch of people who were supposed to file mid-year reports, and about a dozen have missed that deadline. Some of them are, as I mentioned, candidates for next year's races in the county, and some are kind of left over from previous races. So basically, what Chris said is there's really, there's a deadline, but there's really no time limit under state law for election officials to kind of go after, people who haven't filed their report. But what Davis has done in Knox County is he's given them time, and then he said on Monday he plans to send them certified letters, telling them to file their paperwork or else. And you might say, well, what is the or else? And under state law, after 5 days, after they receive this certified letter, after 5 days, the election commission will report people who have not filed, who've still not filed, to the Registry of Election Finance. Then they will be subject to fines, civil penalties of up to $25 per day. And then that every day that they haven't filed, and then after 35 days, they can be fined up to $10,000, or if it's more than that, then 15% of the amount that's in dispute. So while it's not, and mentioned this last week, enforcement of the campaign finance law is primarily aimed at compliance, making sure that people comply, which is okay. In this instance, well, just because they missed a deadline doesn't mean that Seth reminded me. I pointed out that the campaign finance police won't show up to the house, but it is trying to get you to comply, and only after they make efforts to get candidates to comply. Davis, for instance, has said he'd already called Lawhorn about the need to turn in his reports, and he's called the others in the who need mid-year reports. He's talked to some of them, at least some of them, if not all of them, about the need to provide their reports. So basically, the story, the background on this is, yes, there is a kind of a grace period they give officials, but eventually, if somebody just refuses to file paperwork, they will be fined.
But
of course,
at no point it becomes at no point it can undo their ability to run.
It does no, it is not a disqualification.
Okay,
necessarily. Although, if someone just absolutely positively refused, I think that they would probably do fare very poorly in the polls.
I agree with that. Yes,
at the polls, not in the polls, at the polls.
Yeah, and the vast majority of candidates do in fact comply. They get it in either on time or a day or two later. That's because we look at these things all the time, and I can't think of a case where somebody has not eventually turned it in.
No, I couldn't either. That's one of the things when Seth brought this up. I said, well, it's not happened. Usually, I mean, it doesn't take you long. I mean, the first couple of times you cover an election, this is a routine thing that somebody misses the deadline, and you always say, and they always tell you, well, we'll give them a few days, and they'll always come in, and they usually do, and so you kind of go on. But as far as actually being fined for not turning in something, it's a very, very, very rare occurrence, especially on local, a local campaign, and so we'll see. We'll be checking back in with the election commission next week again and see what happens or what has happened with compliance then. And it's kind of just I hate to use the old cliche, herding cats. I mean, there are always one or two who are slow, and they almost invariably end up complying in the end.
Okay, well, let's look ahead to what's coming up next week. Scott, on Monday night, there is the first of what are going to be a series of candidate forums sponsored by the local League of Women Voters. And this first one is going to be for the municipal judge, the city judge candidates. And I believe you are going to be moderating this. Can you tell us where and when?
Yeah, I will tell you where and when. It's going to be at Messiah Lutheran Church, which is on Kingston Pike, at the western foot of Bearden Hill, right where Paper Mill comes in. There's a church there on the south side of Kingston Pike. It will be there at 6:30 p.m. on Monday. It is a forum for the municipal judge candidates. It's a very rare kind of thing. I mean, there hasn't even been a competitive race for municipal judges in 20 years. So, and
this year we have four people,
four candidates running, and the incumbent is John Rawson. He's running. The others attorneys Andrew Beamer, Tyler Cavanis, and Mary Ward. They have all been contacted, and all are expected to attend this forum. There will be this. The primary sponsor is the League of Women Voters. There are a host of others who will be sponsoring, and they cast about and couldn't find anybody else to moderate this one, I guess. So they contacted me, and so I'll be moderating the proceedings, which, given the office and the typical supporters of judicial candidates, does not promise to be a rowdy event. So it'll be interesting, though, to talk to the candidates and get their answers to questions about how what their backgrounds are, why they think they should be the judge for the next 4 years, and kind of how they're going to run the office and that sort of thing. So looking forward to that on Monday.
And we will have our own coverage of that race also coming next week. So for our subscribers, you can keep an eye out for that. Also on Monday, Knox County Commission will hold its monthly voting meeting. Not a super dramatic agenda. They will be appointing a magistrate, a replacement for Ray Jenkins, who just was compelled to step down from his position there. And Scott, I know you covered the work session last week where they talked about this a little bit, but I thought it was interesting that there were a handful of applicants for this position, but then the General Sessions Court judges who have sort of veto power over it also weighed in and said that they would only be okay with two of the people who had actually applied to this. So County Commission is going to have to limit itself to one of those two, I guess.
Yeah, that's one of the quirks of this state law is that the County Commission makes the appointment, but the General Sessions judges, and there are 5 in Knox County, they have to approve whoever the commission appoints. Well, in practice, what they end up doing is the applicants kind of go through the General Sessions judges, and they see who's applying. They look at their resumes. They are familiar with them because just about everybody has practiced in court in General Sessions. Anybody who would want to be a judicial, be qualified for being a judicial magistrate has practiced in the court, and they go ahead and preemptively send in a list of the candidates that they would vote for. And basically, if commission sends them anybody who's not on that list, then they basically will not approve them. And so it's just a way to kind of streamline the process so they don't have to go through if commission sends a candidate that the judges reject and send another one the judges reject, and it goes back and forth. It's a way just to kind of streamline this and say, okay, well, let's not waste anybody's time. Here are the ones we'll take, and if you send them, and that is that. So
well, and I thought it was interesting. Of course, you have to be an attorney to qualify for this, and as you say, you have to have practiced in Sessions Court. I thought it was interesting that among the applicants who the judges did not approve was local attorney Daniel Herrera, who, of course, we mostly know as the former and somewhat controversial chair of the Knox County Republican Party. And I believe all of the Sessions Court judges at this point are Republicans, because all of our elected countywide judges are Republicans. But that kind of party affiliation did not carry over into them recommending Herrera for the position. Yeah,
the one of the things that of course Herrera and two of the other candidates for the position were there. Anyway, the Herrera didn't quite meet the qualifications. One of the things they look at is experience, obviously, in the courtroom. And Herrera is a fairly recently minted attorney. But one of the things is there are attorneys who are substitute judicial magistrates who, if the person who is a full-time judicial magistrate can't be there, they can cover the shift. They do this. They have to go through training. They go there and cover it. They give preference to those substitutes, although it's not a guarantee. They recommended two finalists that they would vote for Spencer Reed and Troy Jones. Reed is a substitute judicial magistrate, is filled in lots of times for magistrates who've been out for various reasons. Jones has been through the training, though I believe he has not actually filled in for another one. But those are the two attorneys that basically commission will have to choose from, because anybody else is kind of a futile gesture on their part.
Right, and magistrates mostly do arraignments, right? That's their primary.
Yeah, they do.
Function.
They do arraignments, and they do they approve warrants. They review orders of protection. They do a lot of the things that the judges do, kind of as on the front end of things. When you watch a movie or a TV police procedural, and always the detectives go to a judge's house and either wake up the judge or they interrupt a fancy dinner party to get them to sign a warrant and stuff like that. That doesn't happen in real life very often. It's you just go to the judicial magistrate instead, right, who's in the basement of the city-county building.
That's why the judges like having the magistrates.
Yes,
so that they can do those things.
Yeah.
Not interrupt their dinner.
Yeah, if there is a fancy dinner party with champagne flowing going on in the basement of the city-county building, then that is a story. But
right.
that is not is not what happens. So I mean, they play a vital kind of procedural role in the court system. So.
Right, and that county commission meeting will be at 5 p.m. Monday in the main assembly room of the city-county building, which will be followed the next night, also in the main assembly room of the city-county building, by a city council meeting, right?
Yes, city council will meet again. They meet every other week in the main assembly room of the city-county building on the Tuesday of that week at 6:00. And this week, there'll be a couple of things that are of note. We have talked about missing middle housing, and Councilwoman Seema Singh's proposal to expand or to do away with the requirement that anyone who wants to build a duplex has to get a special approval in what's known as the R2 zone. It's one of the most common residential zones in the city of Knoxville. Right now, if you want to build a duplex, you've got to get a special use approval for that, and this proposal will do away with that. That would be she's actually asking the commission or the planning commission to review that. That's going to be probably more immediate action is the appointment of Bruce Guyton as a former federal judge to replace Brooklyn Belk as the deputy chief of professional standards at the Knoxville Police Department. The reason it has to go to City Council is Guyton will be taking this on an interim basis, and he will be working on a month-to-month contract. This is an approval of that contract. We'll pay him $1,250 a month, which is pretty close to what Belk made. But unlike the Belk appointment, she resigned last month. She'd only started in February when she resigned. All of the Chief Noel and Belk and the mayor said, "Oh, this was always going to be a temporary appointment." Well, they didn't say that at the beginning. They just it kind of at the end they said, "Oh yeah, it's just going to be temporary." Well, this from the front end is going to be temporary. Guyton is going to be serving until a permanent replacement for Belk is named. That is the subject of a nationwide search because the position does not require a someone to be a law enforcement agent can come from anybody outside of KPD, can come from anywhere, as long as they're an attorney. That is a requirement of the job. So, so it's unclear exactly, obviously, how long Guyton will be serving, but he is going to serve until the new deputy chief is named.
All right. Well, we will be back here next week to talk about all of that and anything else that happened. And I think I will be back in Tennessee next week.
About time.
I know. I've had sort of I've been overseas. I've been isolated with COVID. I've been up here in Western New York. I'm looking forward to just kind of getting back home for a bit. So hopefully I'll be seeing you all in person there at Barbarian Studios. Our production, as always, is by Lord Seth Barber, and our theme music is by Will Wright. And we'll talk to you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.